Did you ever wonder why birds have beaks? How do you think you would eat with no hands and no teeth? In this lecture, the canal and local creeks have a lot of wetlands associated with them. In these wetlands, cattail plants are the dominant vegetation. Cattails are home to the red-winged blackbird. You can see the male blackbirds sitting on top of cattails during spring all across North America, attracting our attention with their almost constant "oka-lee" territorial vocalizations and their bright red and yellow shoulder patches. Female red-winged blackbirds are more cryptic, which in zoology means their coloration gives them camouflage. They have their drab brown plumage and make well-hidden nests among the cattails for their young. I've stumbled upon several of these nests at waist height or so as I slogged through the swamp vegetation, and I wondered how creatures become adapted to particular habitats like these apparently marginal wetlands. One of the answers is these nests. The nests I found were strong, dry, and cup-like, with solid platforms that were stabilized by stringy vegetation wrapped around several vertical cattail stalks. There were some willow fibers and dried leaves in them, and the nests were a few inches across by a few inches deep. Good, dry protection for small blackbird chicks growing up in a swampy environment. Another key to blackbird survival in this wetland environment are the great insect resources, like mosquito larvae, to eat all summer so the chicks grow quickly, and blackbird populations thrive there as long as the wetland habitat is healthy and productive. Seriously amazing, but there are so many other bird species, each with its own set of reproductive adaptations. Let's examine some more of these. Let's start with the early stage of bird reproduction, the display and courtship phase. The purpose of a courtship display is to attract a mate. Among birds, as in most animals, the male is the one who puts on the courtship display. That's because courtship displays require a lot of energy. A reproducing female needs to save her energy for actually producing offspring. Most, but not all of the time, the female puts more time into parental care of newborns, so the males have more energy to burn, and they channel that energy into attracting a mate. How much energy do birds put into courtship displays? Well, it depends. We've all seen Indian peacocks display their amazing shimmering tail eyes, and I think most of us are aware that only the males have these glorious tail feathers. In addition, males have iridescent heads and necks in that striking color we call peacock blue, and blue mixed with green on their breasts, bellies, and backs. Peacock wings are modeled black and white, and their tails combine all of these colors, along with shades of gray and brown. Females, on the other hand, are primarily gray and brown, with just a touch of blue-green iridescence on their necks. By the way, females are properly called peahens, and the gender-neutral term is peafowl. The peacock's vibrant coloring and huge tails are costly to these birds. Most obviously, the tail is an impediment to flight, and their bright coloration stands out against their environment. This makes them more vulnerable to predation. So how would such an adaptation survive? It must confer some advantage, right? The answer comes from our old friend Charles Darwin, who first proposed the idea of sexual selection. By Darwin's definition, males differ in reproductive success either because of their ability to attract females or because of their ability to compete with other males for mates. Male peacocks are dandies, pretty boys that females love to mate with because of their long, beautiful tails. Hypotheses for the evolution of these long tails have accordingly varied from the simple females prefer pretty boys hypothesis to males have long tails because they're healthy and females prefer healthy husbands hypothesis. Both of these hypotheses make sense and cannot be easily separated. Biologists who have worked on peacock mate choice for decades in England, Japan, and North America have found that peahens need a threshold of somewhere above 130 total eye spots in an individual peacock's tail to even consider a mate. And Professor Marion Petrie of Newcastle University found that impressive tails signal good viability genes to females. Males with bigger and better eye spots on their tails produced offspring that weighed more at the age of 3 months and were much more likely to be alive after 2 years in a woodland park than progeny of fathers with fewer eye spots on their tails. French researchers found that tail spots and other display traits in peacocks honestly reflect health status in these birds. Therefore, the notion of female choice in reproduction is important not only for the species in the wild, but for humans working in animal breeding sciences and conservation breeding programs. If females don't have a choice, they sometimes will not mate successfully with the males that some humans select for them. Giving animals a choice of mate whenever possible is important not just for peacocks, but for any number of species. I'm sure you can think of many other birds in which the male's physical appearance is much more colorful than the drab-colored female, like northern cardinals, most species of ducks, pheasants, and even our backyard robins, all the better to increase his animal magnetism and attract a mate. Sometimes, male birds rely on behavior rather than appearance to attract a mate. One of these behaviors is nest building. Consider the golden bowerbird of northern Australia. I have watched these small olive brown and golden birds display near their bower, a decorative pile of sticks. They come in two forms: elaborate avenue bowers bordered by rows of twigs, or maypole bowers made of stacks of twigs around a sapling. Males build their bowers and stay there for a mating period of several months, trying to lure multiple females. Females tend to like males that have the biggest or most elaborate bowers. Each drab-colored female will make the rounds to multiple bowers, not mating, but inspecting each one over several weeks before she settles on a male. When she finally chooses a male, she flies to his bower, enters, and crouches down to invite the male to copulate. After the female bowerbird flies off, she doesn't see her mate again, but incubates the eggs at her hidden nest and rears the chicks all by herself. Professor Gerald Borgia and his colleagues have studied bowerbirds for decades and raised two important questions about the bird's evolution. The first question is, since no other bird species builds anything as elaborate as these bowers, we want to know the possible evolutionary origin of bower building. Analysis of 17 species of bowerbirds suggests that the trait arose only once in a single common ancestor, perhaps one that simply cleared its display area. The second question is why bower building would be maintained by natural selection. Bower quality correlates with male mating success, and it turns out that these males have fewer parasites than bowerbirds with lower quality bowers. So, like the peacock's incredible tail, and perhaps the red-winged blackbird's scarlet epaulets, bowerbird bowers are honest signals of genetic quality and robust health of the male. It's worth noting that the golden bowerbird is the smallest of all bower building species, yet it makes the largest bower. By the way, it turns out that bowerbirds have unusually large brain size when compared to other birds, which may have something to do with those astounding building skills. It's important to understand that bowers are different than nests. A bower's sole purpose is to attract a mate, the bird equivalent of chocolate and flowers, I guess. A nest's purpose is to cradle the bird's eggs. I want to emphasize this. I think a lot of people believe that birds live in nests, but this is a myth, at least most of the time. A bird creates a nest solely for the purpose of laying and hatching their eggs. A lot of different factors help determine the type of nest a bird makes. First, let's consider the most obvious one, the size and number of her eggs. Imagine a bird's egg that is only 1/2 the diameter of a US dime. The vervain hummingbird of Jamaica lays such an egg in a nest half the size of a walnut shell. The egg, weighing 0.37 grams, about as much as a US penny, and it's about 1/6 the weight of the tiny adult. Vervain and bee hummingbirds are the two smallest creatures living today in the entire bird world. Hummingbird nests are often made of spider web material, fine animal hair, some down, some small bits of moss for camouflage, and other suitable tiny materials, and are constructed in a shrub or bush only about 3 feet off the ground. The spider webbing gives the nest an elastic quality so the two tiny chicks can spread beyond the nest walls as they grow. At the opposite end of the continuum, ostrich eggs are huge. They're at least 6 inches in diameter and can weigh up to 3 pounds, but they're only about 2% of the size of the adult bird, making them the smallest eggs relative to adult size among almost 10,000 species of birds. They also have one of the simplest forms of nest. Female ostriches lay their eggs in shallow scrapes made by the adult male, and the large male can physically protect his eggs as he incubates them, and also the precocial babies as they grow in these simple earth scrapes. Not to be outdone by its relatively small egg-laying ostrich relatives, the kiwi, which is roughly the size of a chicken, lays eggs 10 times the size of a chicken's egg. In contrast to ostriches, their close relatives, the kiwi lays one of the largest eggs in proportion to adult body size, about 1/5 to 1/4 of the female's body mass. If we consider that a super precocious chick hatches out of the kiwi egg at the end of its incubation period, we could then also compare this egg to the size of a human child at birth. If we compare in this way, the kiwi egg is the equivalent of a human female giving birth to a 25-pound child, about the size of a 4-year-old. But even these large chicks are no match for the dogs, cats, and weasels, or stoats, that Europeans have introduced to the islands of New Zealand over the last 200 years. And we hope the control efforts of the country's Department of Conservation help to save their national bird. Why would such a small bird have such a huge egg? The famous evolutionary biologist Stephen Jay Gould had originally offered a good theory, that the kiwi evolved from a large ancestral bird like the giant moa, and the huge egg was a not-so-adaptive holdover from that big ancestor. But more recent molecular evidence suggests that kiwis evolved from a smaller bird, like today's partridge-sized tinamous, which kind of refutes the big bird, big egg hypothesis. Scientists from museums and universities in New Zealand and Australia have recently given us a new and interesting hypothesis for the huge kiwi egg. They suggest that kiwi chicks are born large and very precocial, so they're ready to outrun historical flying predators on their native islands. These chicks have a full internal yolk sac, which gives them enough nutrition to give them a good start in life until they can effectively feed for themselves several weeks after hatching. Notice that I said kiwi chicks must outrun their predators. The kiwi is flightless, just like its big rat-tight cousin, the ostrich. And like the ostrich, it lays its eggs on the ground, or more accurately, in the ground. Kiwis dig a large enough hole to fit themselves inside and line it with vegetation. These birds are one of the exceptions to the rule I mentioned earlier. They spend their days inside this burrow or hollow log or something similar, and they spend their nights foraging. So even though the nest is on the ground, the burrow offers some protection to the eggs and hatchlings. And it's the male kiwi who incubates the eggs. Producing such a large egg is tough on the female kiwi, so the male takes over the parenting duties after the egg is laid, while the female recovers. While kiwis and ostriches make somewhat similar nests, they do have some differences in reproductive habits. Kiwis tend to mate for life, while ostriches are promiscuous. Still, it is the male who does most of the incubating and rearing of young. The tall, dark, and handsome male ostriches then incubate the eggs of multiple females and raise the chicks in shallow scrapes in the ground. They are quite amusing as they lead their little camouflaged chicks around the grassland, talking to them softly and keeping them in a small, grounded flock. Obviously, nesting ratites don't have much of a choice about making their nests on the ground. Flighted birds have more choices, and when we observe these birds, we get glimpses of the coevolution between nest and egg, and how the form of one affects the form of the other. Common murres are diving seabirds that live most of their lives out at sea, but pack themselves in on cliff tops or in crevices in cliff faces during nesting season, nesting in huge groups of up to 1 million birds. In these colonies on cliff tops and rock ledges, we might find dozens of birds per square meter, the most densely packed nesting of any bird. The nesting cliffs are barren rocks that don't even have much vegetation, but also don't have many ground predators, making them an ideal place to nest. But this is not what keeps eggs safe when they're just laid on the bare rock. The eggs have evolved into a pointy pear shape, and if one rolls, it simply rolls around in a circle rather than off the cliff. Pigeons are good breeders, and it turns out that many pigeon species make loose nests that they build on cliffs or forks of tree branches. But they don't carry off their feces like other birds do, so the nest eventually builds up into something more substantial. The female pigeon lays one egg, then another about a day later, into this simple nest. The female and the male take turns incubating the eggs over each 24-hour period. When the pigeon chick hatches 2.5 weeks later, both male and female pigeons make a special cheesy substance called crop milk that they feed the chicks over the first week or so. After that, they feed a special seed mixture that they regurgitate for the chicks. Robins are another very common bird in the northern hemisphere. Female American robins build their nests from the inside out, starting with feathers, grass, moss, and small twigs on the inside, while forming it into a cup shape. Then using more small twigs and other sturdy materials along with some mud on the outside to reinforce the cup. Finally, the female robin will line the inside with more soft feathers and dry grass before she lays 3 to 5 bluish eggs. She incubates the eggs for about 2 weeks. Then the helpless altricial chicks are fed in the nest by both parents for the next 2 weeks before they fledge. Robins can have 3 broods per season, but less than 50% of nests are successful, and only about 10% of all chicks hatched will survive through the next winter. Despite this low survivorship of chicks, scientists think the global population is over 300 million robins in North America, and that the population is stable or increasing partly because our backyard habitats are good habitats for robins. Some birds build even more intricate nests. The bird family Icteridae includes the colorful Baltimore orioles of North America and Oropendulas of South America. Baltimore orioles are smaller than their tropical relatives, and the Amazonian Oropendula is the largest of the entire family at 20 inches long. Although nesting habits within the family are variable, the orioles and Oropendulas make fascinating pendulous nests. The oriole makes its solitary hanging nest from a fork of a branch high in a tree, where the female weaves skinny fibers and animal hairs into the distinctive, predator-proof, sock-shaped nest. It takes her about 1 week to develop the nest. Then she lays 5 or 7 splotchy-colored eggs in the nest. These eggs hatch out after 2 weeks. Then the parents spend 2 weeks feeding the chicks in the nest until they fledge. The Montezuma Oropendula, a chestnut-colored bird with a bright yellow tail, lives in the Central American lowlands and nests in colonies of 30 to over 150 individual pendulous nests woven from leaf fiber and vines. Each female in the colony has her own private nest and lays 2 whitish eggs that hatch in about 2 weeks. It's easy to find the large groups and their young in the tropical forests, and these large groups probably provide some safety in numbers for individual birds. Even more interesting is the sociable weaver bird of southern Africa that builds large apartment-style colonial nests for the flock. These huge, multi-chambered, haystack-like hanging nests of sticks and grass are built high in a tree to protect the birds from predators like snakes. Other bird species may live in the empty nest chambers, which gives all nest inhabitants an extra set of eyes watching for predators. The nest entrance tunnels are about 10 inches long and 3 inches wide, with some spiky twigs at the entrance holes to further impede predators. And the tunnels end in larger chambers for each family group. The huge nests help these small weaver birds stay warm on freezing desert nights as the birds seek the warmth of the inner parts of the structure, and to manage their body temperatures during the hot day when the birds can stay near the well-ventilated outside of the nest structure. These little birds can begin or add on to one of these huge structures with no training or experience. All of their weaving techniques seem to be instinctual. I would like to finish this story of nests and bird reproduction by talking about an obvious safe place to nest, inside a tree cavity. Many birds have adopted this nesting strategy, from tiny chickadees to large woodpeckers, from desert birds like cactus wrens that nest in cactus cavities to wetland birds like North America's beautiful wood ducks that nest high up in tree cavities in flooded forests. These old trees and other plants in their cavities are important for the future of the bird species that use them. We found this out in the United States when wood ducks almost went extinct in the 20th century, and wildlife managers provided predator-proof artificial nest boxes high on poles in swamps in a successful bid to bring the birds back from the brink. Understanding the natural history of a species' breeding and feeding needs is important for its conservation. We have protected swamps, flooded woodland, and prairie potholes for waterfowl conservation, and we protect grassland and forest for pheasant and songbird conservation. And foresters pay attention to conservation needs. They leave tall dead timber that appears devoid of all life for cavity nesters like woodpeckers and owls. I think the most incredible of the tree cavity nests are the ones made by the 50+ species of hornbills of Asia and Africa. Hornbills are large, can be colorful, and have large and distinctive bills. These birds are so distinctive that they are iconic in native cultures where they occur. Hornbills are mostly monogamous, and pairs defend noticeable territories. So in Indonesia, they are symbols of mate fidelity. Most of the hornbills build a nest in a rock crevice or tree cavity whose entrance the male and female pack with mud, saliva, and small pieces of wood to make a small slit after the female is safely inside. The male feeds the female through the slit and guards the nest against predators. The narrow slit keeps egg predators and even other males away from the female. Females remain in these walled-off nests for 3 to 5 months while they incubate eggs and brood the chicks. Although females of some hornbill species break out before the chicks fledge, help to rebuild the mud-walled slit opening to the nest, and help the male to provide for their young. After the chicks are born, the male needs to feed the female and the chicks nutritious seeds, berries, insects, lizards, and frogs for weeks until the hornbill chicks are ready to fledge. In some species, up to 70 days after hatching. One male great hornbill was observed delivering a huge meal to the female during a single visit. Over 150 figs, some beetles, snakes, lizards, scorpions, bats, even the young of other birds, all regurgitated one after the other. Females apparently prefer a varied diet, and will refuse food if it is too much of the same food. An alternative to a strong nest is, of course, an open nest on a rockscape, like we described for murres, and a behavior of strong nest defense. Geese and swans are mild-looking birds that are well known for their strong nest defense, even against foxes and other predators. Trying to chase foxes away or defending the nest against them turns out to be costly for snow geese. Recent studies by Canadian scientists found different risks of injury for male geese that initiate attacks on local foxes versus for female geese that are most often sitting on nests when attacked by foxes. So even though geese have clear roles and responsibilities where the male defends the nest and females incubate the eggs, the female parental role may expose them to greater danger. Male geese may reduce the risk of death or injury to their mates and eggs by initiating preemptive strikes on foraging foxes. We have just talked about the amazing adaptations of some of the world's 10,000 species of birds. Birdwatching some of these creatures during nesting season can be seriously amazing, and we hope you'll join in every year. Now let's think about what we know just about peacock tails and bowerbird bowers as courtship displays that honestly advertise a male's good genes or health status. What did you learn about honest signaling by males trying to attract females? Are there any birds in your area that have noticeable courtship displays that you might be able to observe? If you were an ornithologist, what questions might you ask about the evolutionary origins of that display and how it's maintained by natural selection through time?